The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Marcus Thompson approached the display case, his grandson Tyler clutching his hand. The elderly man's weathered fingers traced the glass, separating him from a faded Purple Heart medal. "That one there," he whispered, "looks just like mine." Behind them, museum security guard Derek Walsh rolled his eyes and muttered to his colleague, "Here we go again with another fake war hero." What Derek didn't know was that in exactly 17 minutes, his entire world would be turned upside down when the real owner of that Purple Heart walked through those museum doors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Derek Walsh adjusted his security badge and took his position near the World War II exhibit at the National Military Heritage Museum in downtown Richmond. At 28, Derek had worked museum security for 3 years, and he'd grown tired of what he called glory seekers, elderly visitors who claimed connections to the artifacts on display. In his mind, real heroes didn't need to brag about their service. The morning started like any other Tuesday. School groups hadn't arrived yet, leaving the halls mostly empty, except for a few early visitors. Derek's partner, Janet Rodriguez, was stationed near the entrance, while he covered the main exhibition floor. The WW2 section was his favorite assignment, not because of any particular interest in history, but because it was usually quiet and gave him time to scroll through his phone. Around 10:30 a.m., Derek noticed an elderly black man with silver hair and a slight limp making his way through the Pacific Theater display. The man, later identified as Marcus Thompson, was accompanied by a young boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder as his grandfather pointed out different artifacts and explained their significance. Derek initially paid them little attention until he overheard Marcus telling the boy about the Battle of Iwo Jima. "The fighting was so intense," Marcus said softly, "that some days we couldn't tell if we'd make it through the night. But we had each other, and that made all the difference." Rolling his eyes, Derek moved closer under the pretense of checking the security cameras. He'd heard similar stories countless times from visitors who claimed military service. In Derek's experience, the real veterans were usually quiet about their service, not spinning elaborate tales for their grandchildren. The pair moved to the Medal of Honor section, where Marcus stopped in front of a display case containing several Purple Heart medals. His weathered hand pressed against the glass as he studied one particular medal, a Purple Heart with a slightly tarnished ribbon and a small dent on the left edge. "Tyler," Marcus said to his grandson, "that medal right there reminds me of one I used to have. Lost it during a move about 20 years ago." His voice carried a note of genuine sadness that Derek dismissed as theatrical performance. Tyler pressed his small face against the glass. "What did you do to earn yours, Grandpa?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes never leaving the display. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is help your fellow soldiers when they're hurt, even when it's dangerous to do so. I carried a lot of wounded men to safety during my time in the Pacific." Derek had heard enough. He approached the pair with his arms crossed, his security badge catching the overhead lights. "Excuse me, sir," he said in his most authoritative voice, "but I need to ask you not to touch the display cases. The oils from your hands can damage the glass." Marcus immediately stepped back, raising his hands apologetically. "Of course, I'm sorry about that. He got a little carried away looking at the Purple Heart." "Yeah, I bet you did," Derek replied, with barely concealed skepticism. "Let me guess, you've got one just like it at home, right? Or maybe you lost it in a move?" His tone made it clear he was mocking Marcus's earlier statement. The elderly man's expression remained calm, though Tyler looked up at Derek with confusion. "My grandfather really was in the war," the boy said defensively. Derek knelt down to Tyler's level, speaking in a condescending tone that he probably thought was friendly. "Son, lots of people like to tell stories about being war heroes, but the real soldiers who fought in that war are mostly gone now. Your grandfather is probably just trying to make history seem more exciting for you." Marcus placed a protective hand on Tyler's shoulder. "It's all right, Tyler. The young man is just doing his job. He looked at Derek with quiet dignity. I understand your skepticism. There are indeed people who fabricate military service for various reasons. Exactly, Derek said, standing back up with a satisfied expression. Look, I'm not trying to be mean, but I see this stuff every day. People come in here claiming they knew someone who served, or that they served themselves, and it's usually just attention-seeking behavior. The real heroes don't need to brag about what they did. Other visitors were beginning to notice the commotion. A middle-aged couple with cameras around their necks had stopped pretending to read the informational plaques and were openly listening to the exchange. Near the entrance, Janet Rodriguez looked over with concern, but remained at her post. Marcus nodded slowly, his arm still around his grandson's shoulders. You're absolutely right that real heroes don't brag. Most of us who served prefer not to talk about the worst parts of what we experienced. But sometimes sharing our stories with the next generation helps them understand the cost of freedom. Us who served, Derek repeated mockingly. Right. And I suppose you were at D-Day too? Maybe you knew General MacArthur personally. I served in the Pacific Theater under General MacArthur's command, actually, but I never met him personally, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. I was just a medic with the 402nd Infantry Regiment, Derek snorted. The 402nd? Come on, old man. At least do your research if you're going to lie about military service. Everyone knows the 442nd was a Japanese-American unit. You're going to tell me they let black soldiers serve alongside Japanese Americans back then? Marcus's expression shifted slightly, a flash of something, perhaps disappointment, crossing his features. The military was indeed segregated during World War II, but there were exceptions made in combat situations, particularly for medical personnel. I was assigned to the 402nd as a medic because of my medical training and because they desperately needed experienced field medics. That's convenient, Derek said, his voice growing louder and drawing more attention from other visitors. Let me guess, all your documentation was lost, right? No way to prove any of this? Tyler tugged on his grandfather's sleeve. Grandpa, can we just look at something else? Before Marcus could respond, Derek continued his verbal assault. You know what really bothers me about people like you? There are families out there who lost real heroes in that war, and here you are, making up stories to impress your grandson. It's disrespectful to the men who actually died fighting for this country. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. The small crowd that had gathered was now openly staring, some looking sympathetic to Marcus, others appearing uncertain about what to believe. Marcus Thompson stood there quietly, his dignity intact despite the public humiliation, his arm still protectively around his grandson's shoulders. What Derek Walsh didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known as he stood there smugly, dismissing an elderly man's military service, was that at that very moment, a black sedan was pulling into the museum's parking lot. Inside that sedan sat Colonel James Mitchell, the museum's head of military liaison, returning from a morning meeting with several World War II veterans who were planning to attend the museum's upcoming commemoration ceremony. And sitting in the passenger seat, adjusting his jacket and preparing to surprise his old friend Marcus Thompson with an impromptu visit, was Medal of Honor recipient Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, the same Robert Chen who had served alongside Marcus Thompson in the 442nd Infantry Regiment, and who had personally witnessed Marcus carry 12 wounded soldiers to safety during the Battle of the Lost Battalion in the forests of France. Derek's accusations echoed through the exhibition hall as more visitors gravitated toward the commotion. An elderly white woman clutching a museum brochure whispered to her husband, "How awful, lying about military service like that." A teenage girl with her parents pulled out her phone. Sensing drama was about to unfold, Marcus Thompson maintained his composure, but Tyler was growing visibly upset. The 8-year-old's eyes were filling with tears as he looked between his grandfather and the uniformed guard, who was calling his hero a liar. "Please," Marcus said quietly, "there's no need to make this more difficult than it needs to be. Tyler and I will move along to another exhibit, But Derek wasn't finished. The small crowd had emboldened him, and he seemed to relish his role as the defender of military honor. Oh no, you don't get to just walk away after disrespecting actual veterans. You know what? I think we should call this in. He reached for his radio, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. Janet, can you come to the WRT section? We've got a situation here, with someone making false claims about military service. Janet Rodriguez's voice crackled back through the radio. En route. Everything okay, Derek? Just dealing with another stolen valor case. This gentleman here claims he served with the 442nd Regiment and lost his Purple Heart. Real convenient story. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. Tyler, however, couldn't contain himself any longer. My grandpa isn't lying. The boy shouted, his small voice carrying throughout the hall. He has pictures and everything at home. Derek looked down at the child with mock sympathy. Pictures can be faked, son. Anyone can get their hands on old military photos and claim they're in them. Your grandfather is probably a nice man, but he's not telling you the truth about being a war hero. The crowd was growing larger. A family of tourists had joined the middle-aged couple, and several other visitors had abandoned their exploration of nearby exhibits to witness the confrontation. Some were recording with their phones, sensing they might be capturing something significant. Janet arrived, her expression concerned as she took in the scene. Unlike Derek, she approached the situation with professionalism. What seems to be the problem here? Derek gestured toward Marcus with theatrical exasperation. This gentleman is telling his grandson that he served in World War II with the 432nd Infantry Regiment. Claims he was a medic, earned a Purple Heart, the whole 9 yards. When I pointed out that the 442nd was Japanese-American and that his story doesn't add up, he started making excuses about special assignments. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Janet looked at Marcus, then at the small crowd of onlookers, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the confrontation. Sir, is there some documentation you can provide to verify your service? Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket, pulling out his wallet. From it he extracted a worn piece of paper, what appeared to be an old military identification card, yellowed with age and nearly falling apart at the creases. Derek immediately scoffed. Come on, that could be anyone's old ID. Could be fake, could be someone else's. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Marcus handed the document to Janet, who examined it carefully. The ID showed a much younger version of Marcus Thompson, with the date of birth matching what appeared to be his current age. It listed his rank as corpsman and his unit as the 402nd Regimental Combat Team. This looks legitimate, Janet said quietly to Derek. But I'm not an expert on World War II military documentation. Of course it looks legitimate, Derek interrupted, loud enough for the crowd to hear. That's the whole point of a good fake. Look, I've been working security here for 3 years. I've seen every trick in the book. Real veterans don't need to prove themselves to museum guards. They're secure in their service. But the fakers? They always have some convenient piece of evidence ready to go. An older man in the crowd spoke up. Young man, you're being awfully hard on this gentleman. Even if you have doubts, there's a respectful way to handle this. Derek turned toward the speaker, his authority clearly going to his head. Sir, with all due respect, stolen valor is a serious issue. It's disrespectful to every man and woman who actually served this country. I'm not going to stand by and let someone lie about military service in front of his own grandson. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice steady but carrying an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. Young man, I understand your position, and I appreciate that you want to protect the honor of military service. But you're making assumptions based on incomplete information. Incomplete information? Derek laughed harshly. What's incomplete about it? You claim you were a black medic assigned to a Japanese-American unit during World War II, when everyone knows the military was strictly segregated. You claim you lost your Purple Heart, but conveniently have other documentation. And now you're trying to make me look like the bad guy for questioning an obviously fake story. The tension in the room was becoming palpable. Tyler had moved behind his grandfather, his small hands clutching at Marcus's coat. Several visitors looked uncomfortable with Derek's increasingly aggressive tone, while others seemed to be buying into his narrative. You know what? Derek continued, now fully committed to his course of action. I think we should call the police and let them sort this out. Filing false claims about military service is actually illegal in some circumstances. Janet placed a hand on Derek's arm. Let's not escalate this further. Maybe we should just... No, Derek shook her off. I'm tired of being the nice guy while people disrespect our veterans. This man is lying to his own grandson about being a war hero, and I'm not going to pretend that's okay. He turned back to Marcus, his voice rising. You want to know what I think? I think you found some old military ID, maybe at a flea market or in some dead veterans' belongings, and you decided to use it to make yourself seem important. I think you've been telling these lies for so long that you've started believing them yourself. The crowd was dead silent now, everyone waiting to see how Marcus would respond to this escalating attack on his character and his service. Tyler was openly crying, though he tried to hide his tears behind his grandfather's coat. Marcus Thompson looked at Derek Walsh with an expression that somehow managed to be both disappointed and forgiving. Son, I hope that someday you'll understand that your passion for protecting military honor is admirable, but your methods are flawed. You're so concerned with catching fake veterans that you've lost sight of how to treat people with basic human dignity. Don't lecture me about dignity, Derek shot back. You're the one lying about military service. What happened next would be replayed on social media thousands of times over the following weeks. The main entrance doors to the museum opened, and Colonel James Mitchell walked in, followed by several distinguished-looking elderly gentlemen. Among them was a small, elderly Asian-American man wearing a jacket covered in military pins and medals. Janet noticed them first. Derek, she said urgently, that's Colonel Mitchell. Derek glanced toward the entrance, recognizing the museum's military liaison. So, maybe he can help us sort this out. But Marcus Thompson had turned toward the entrance as well, and his face was transforming. The dignified composure he'd maintained throughout Derek's verbal assault was giving way to something else entirely. Recognition, followed by pure joy. Bobby, Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the exhibition hall. Bobby Chen? The elderly Asian-American man stopped in his tracks, scanning the crowd until his eyes found Marcus. His face broke into an enormous smile as he immediately changed direction, walking quickly toward the confrontation. Marcus Thompson, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen called back, his voice filled with warmth and excitement. What are you doing here? Derek watched in confusion as the two elderly men embraced in the middle of the museum floor, both of them laughing and talking at once. Colonel Mitchell and the other veterans had followed Chen over, and suddenly Derek found himself surrounded by what was clearly a group of distinguished military veterans. I can't believe it, Chen was saying, his hands on Marcus's shoulders. How long has it been? 20 years? 25. Too long, old friend, Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. Way too long. Derek's confident demeanor was beginning to waver as he realized he might have seriously misjudged the situation. The crowd of onlookers was watching with rapt attention as the two men continued their reunion, and Janet was looking at Derek with growing concern. Colonel Mitchell approached the reunion with a puzzled but pleased expression. Bobby, you didn't mention you knew someone here today. Staff Sergeant Chen turned to the colonel, his arm still around Marcus's shoulders. Jim, I want you to meet Marcus Thompson, the man who saved my life in the Vosges Mountains. Derek's face went pale. The confident smirk he'd worn throughout the confrontation vanished as the implications of Chen's words began to sink in. Around them, the crowd of onlookers pressed closer, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Colonel Mitchell extended his hand to Marcus. Any friend of Bobby's is a friend of mine. I'm Colonel James Mitchell, military liaison here at the museum. Marcus shook the colonel's hand warmly. Marcus Thompson. It's an honor to meet you, Colonel. The honor is mine, Mitchell replied, then turned to Chen. Bobby, did you say he saved your life? Chen's eyes grew misty as he nodded. October 1944, in the forests of eastern France. Marcus here carried me and 11 other wounded soldiers out of a German ambush. Took him 3 trips back into enemy fire to get us all to safety. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be standing here today. Derek felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, but he wasn't ready to admit his mistake. Wait, he interrupted, his voice cracking slightly. Anyone can make up stories about knowing each other. This could all be some elaborate... Chen turned to look at Derek for the first time, his expression shifting from joy to curiosity. Excuse me, young man, is there a problem here? Janet stepped forward, clearly embarrassed by her partner's behavior. I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant. My colleague here was questioning this gentleman's military service, questioning Marcus's service. Jen's voice carried a note of disbelief. On what grounds? Derek's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. He claimed he served with the 442nd Regiment. But that was a Japanese-American unit, and the military was segregated back then. His story didn't add up. A heavy silence fell over the group. Chen looked at Derek with an expression that was somehow both pitying and stern. Young man, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team was indeed primarily composed of Japanese Americans. But during the rescue of the lost battalion in France, we were reinforced with additional medical personnel from other units, including African American medics like Marcus. Colonel Mitchell nodded slowly. That's historically accurate. The 442nd worked with several integrated medical units during specific operations, Chen continued, his voice taking on the authority of someone who had lived through history rather than just read about it. Marcus was assigned to our unit because he had extensive field medical training and because we desperately needed experienced medics. He wasn't just assigned to us, he became one of us. Derek's face was now completely drained of color. But how do I know this is really him? How do I know you're not just... Chen reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. From it, he extracted a faded black and white photograph. This was taken 3 days after the rescue mission. He held it up so Derek and the crowd could see. The photograph showed a group of soldiers, both Asian and black, standing together with their arms around each other's shoulders. In the center, a young Marcus Thompson was clearly visible, his medic's cross prominently displayed on his helmet. That's Marcus, Chen said, pointing to the figure in the photo. And that's me right next to him. We were brothers in arms, son. Brothers. Derek stared at the photograph, his last defense crumbling. But Chen wasn't finished. You want to know about Marcus's Purple Heart? Chen continued, his voice growing stronger. He earned it on October 30th, 1944, when he ran back into enemy fire to rescue Private Johnson after a German grenade exploded near our position. Marcus took shrapnel in his left shoulder and kept working on wounded soldiers for 6 more hours before he'd let anyone treat his own wounds. Tyler had emerged from behind his grandfather, his tear-stained face looking up at Chen with wonder. Marcus knelt down to his grandson's level. Tyler, I'd like you to meet my old friend Bobby. He's the reason I kept all those old photographs you love looking at. Chen knelt down as well, smiling at the boy. Your grandfather is a genuine American hero, Tyler, one of the bravest men I've ever known. Derek was standing frozen in place, his face a mask of horror as the full weight of his mistake became clear. He had publicly humiliated an actual war hero, a decorated veteran who had risked his life to save others. And he had done it in front of the man's grandson. Colonel Mitchell addressed Derek directly. Son, I think you owe Mr. Thompson an apology. Derek's voice was barely a whisper. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I thought I was protecting the honor of real veterans, but Marcus stood up slowly, his dignity intact despite everything he had endured. Derek, I accept your apology. You were trying to do the right thing, even if your methods were misguided, but Chen was less forgiving. Young man, Do you have any idea what you've done here today? You publicly accused a decorated war veteran of stolen valor. You humiliated him in front of his grandson and a crowd of strangers, all because you made assumptions instead of asking respectful questions. Janet touched Derek's arm gently. Derek, maybe you should take a break. I can handle things here. Derek nodded numbly, but before he could leave, Chen spoke again. Wait, before you go, I want you to understand something. Marcus never talks about what he did during the war. Most real veterans don't. We carry those memories quietly because they're often too painful to share. The fact that he was here today, sharing stories with his grandson, probably took more courage than you'll ever understand. Marcus looked at Chen with gratitude. Bobby, it's okay. The young man made an honest mistake. No, Marcus, it's not okay, Chen replied firmly. This kind of behavior toward veterans is unacceptable. This man didn't just question your service. He accused you of lying to your own grandson about being a war hero. That goes beyond a simple mistake. Colonel Mitchell had been listening intently to the exchange. Mr. Thompson, if you don't mind me asking, which Purple Heart in our display reminded you of yours? Marcus walked over to the display case, Chen and the others following. He pointed to the medal with the slightly tarnished ribbon and small dent. That one there. Mine had the same kind of dent from when a piece of shrapnel hit it during the same explosion that wounded me. Chen looked at the medal, then at Colonel Mitchell. Jim, is there any way to research the provenance of that particular medal? Mitchell nodded. We have detailed records on every artifact. Let me make a quick call to our research department. As the colonel stepped away to make his call, Chen turned back to Derek, who was still standing there looking devastated. Son, I want you to learn something from this. Real veterans don't owe you proof of their service. We earned the right to be treated with respect, not suspicion. Marcus Thompson served his country with honor, and today you dishonored him based on nothing more than your own prejudices and assumptions. Derek's voice was barely audible. How can I make this right? Marcus approached Derek, placing a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. You can start by remembering that every veteran has a story, and those stories deserve respect until proven otherwise. You can also remember that the uniform doesn't make the man, character does. Tyler tugged on his grandfather's sleeve. Grandpa, does this mean everyone knows you're a real hero now? Marcus smiled down at his grandson. Tyler, I was never trying to prove I was a hero. I was just sharing our family's history with you. Colonel Mitchell returned, his expression grave. Mr. Thompson, I've just received some very interesting information about that Purple Heart you were looking at. According to our records, it was donated by the estate of a World War II veteran named Marcus Thompson, approximately 20 years ago. The donor said it belonged to her late husband, who served with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team as a medic. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at the display case, his eyes wide with recognition. My wife donated it after she thought I had died in a car accident. I was in a coma for 3 months, and when I woke up, she had already given away most of my military belongings because she couldn't bear to look at them. Chen grabbed Marcus's arm. Marcus, that's your actual Purple Heart in there? Marcus nodded, tears forming in his eyes for the first time that day. I never thought I'd see it again. Derek stood there, witnessing the reunion of a war hero with his own medal. A medal he had just spent the last hour claiming was fake, belonging to a man he had accused of lying about his military service. The irony was almost too much to bear. The crowd that had gathered to watch Derek humiliate an elderly man now watched in stunned silence as the truth revealed itself. In the most dramatic way possible, the revelation that Marcus's own Purple Heart sat in the display case sent ripples through the crowd. Several visitors who had been recording the confrontation on their phones were now capturing something entirely different, a moment of profound historical and personal significance that none of them had expected to witness. Colonel Mitchell immediately took charge of the situation. Mr. Thompson, I need to make some calls. This is an extraordinary circumstance, and we'll need to verify the documentation. But if that medal truly belongs to you, will absolutely facilitate its return." Marcus stared at the display case, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "I never imagined. When Helen donated my things, I understood why she did it. She thought she was burying me, along with the memories that caused me nightmares. I never blamed her for it." Chen placed a supportive hand on his old friend's back. "Helen always was protective of you. She called me crying after you woke up from the coma, saying she'd made a terrible mistake giving away your military items." Tyler looked between the adults, trying to understand the magnitude of what was happening. "Grandpa, is that really your medal?" Before Marcus could answer, Derek stepped forward. His face was ashen, and his voice shook as he spoke. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know how to begin to apologize for what I've done. I accused you of lying about something that turned out to be more true than I could have possibly imagined." The crowd was watching Derek's public reckoning with fascination. Some held their phones steady, others had put their devices away, seemingly understanding that they were witnessing something too personal for social media. Marcus turned to face Derek, his expression thoughtful. "Son, we all make mistakes. The measure of a person isn't whether they make errors in judgment, it's how they handle the aftermath." "But this wasn't just a mistake," Derek insisted, his voice growing stronger as he forced himself to confront his actions. "I was arrogant. I made assumptions based on prejudice, if I'm being honest. I saw an elderly black man claiming to have served in a predominantly Japanese-American unit, and instead of listening with an open mind, I decided he must be lying." Janet had been standing quietly nearby, but now she spoke up. "Derek, maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," Derek said firmly. "I humiliated Mr. Thompson publicly. The least I can do is acknowledge my mistakes publicly." He turned back to Marcus. "Sir, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a commitment to do better." Staff Sergeant Chen had been listening to Derek's confession with a measured expression. "Young man, what you've described, making assumptions about someone's service based on their race, that's exactly the kind of thinking that Marcus and soldiers like him had to fight against, both during the war and after they came home." Derek nodded miserably. "I know, and the worst part is I thought I was defending military honor. Instead, I was doing the exact opposite." Colonel Mitchell returned from his phone calls with news. "Mr. Thompson, I've spoken with our curator and our legal department. Given the unique circumstances and the clear documentation we have on file, we can begin the process of returning your Purple Heart immediately. It may take a few days to complete the paperwork, but the medal is rightfully yours." Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "Colonel, I'm grateful, but I want you to know I didn't come here today expecting this. I was just trying to share some history with my grandson." "And that's exactly what real heroes do," Chen said loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. "They don't seek recognition. They don't demand special treatment. They quietly go about their lives, sharing their wisdom with the next generation." A woman in the crowd, the same one who had earlier whispered about Marcus lying, approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson. I owe you an apology as well. I believed what the security guard was saying, and I made judgments about you without knowing the facts." "I'm sorry." Her admission seemed to open floodgates. Several other onlookers who had been skeptical of Marcus's claims during Derek's accusations now came forward to express their regret and admiration. Derek watched this unfold, seeing how his initial accusations had influenced the entire crowd's perception of Marcus. "I did this," he said quietly to Janet. "I turned all these people against a war hero because I was so convinced I was right." Tyler had been unusually quiet during the adults' conversation, but now he tugged on Chen's sleeve. "Mr. Bobby, were you really saved by my grandpa?" Chen knelt down to Tyler's level again, his expression growing serious. "Your grandfather ran through enemy gunfire 3 separate times to carry wounded soldiers to safety. He saved my life and the lives of 11 other men. And you want to know something else?" Tyler nodded eagerly. "After he got us all to safety, he spent the rest of the night treating our wounds, even though he was bleeding from his own injuries. He never complained, never asked for help until every other soldier was taken care of." Marcus looked embarrassed by the praise. Bobby, you're making it sound more dramatic than it was. No, my friend, I'm not, Chen replied firmly, standing back up. You need to understand something, Marcus. What you did that day wasn't just heroic, it was extraordinary. And the fact that you've carried that burden quietly for 80 years makes it even more remarkable. Colonel Mitchell had been observing the interaction with growing interest. Mr. Thompson, I'd like to invite you to be our guest speaker at next month's Veterans Day ceremony. We have events throughout November, and I think our visitors would benefit enormously from hearing your story. Marcus looked uncertain. Colonel, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not much of a public speaker. Neither was I when I started, Mitchell replied with a smile. But sometimes the most important stories are told by people who don't think they're storytellers. Derek, who had been standing slightly apart from the group, stepped forward again. Mr. Thompson, if you do decide to speak, I'd like to attend. I think I need to hear your story properly. Marcus studied Derek's face, seeing genuine remorse and a desire to learn. Derek, I think that could be arranged. But I have a condition. Derek straightened up, prepared for whatever consequence Marcus might impose. Anything, sir. I want you to help me tell the story. Not as punishment, but as a learning opportunity. For both of us. The suggestion surprised everyone, including Derek himself. Sir, I don't understand. After what I did to you today, why would you want my help with anything? Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shown since the confrontation began. Because, son, you've learned something important today. You've learned that your assumptions were wrong, and you've had the courage to admit it publicly. That kind of growth doesn't happen often, and when it does, it should be nurtured. Chen nodded approvingly. Marcus always was the wisest of us. Even during the war, he had a way of turning conflicts into opportunities for understanding. Derek's eyes were watering now, overwhelmed by Marcus's unexpected grace. Mr. Thompson, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll spend however long it takes trying to earn it. You already have it, Marcus replied simply. Now let's figure out how to make sure this kind of misunderstanding doesn't happen to other veterans. Colonel Mitchell pulled out his business card. Mr. Thompson, I'd like to set up a meeting with you this week to discuss not just the speaking engagement, but possibly developing some educational materials about integrated units during World War II. Your story could help correct a lot of misconceptions. As the crowd began to disperse, many visitors approached Marcus to shake his hand and express their admiration. Tyler stood proudly beside his grandfather, no longer hiding behind his coat, but beaming as people praised his hero. Janet approached Derek as he stood watching the positive attention Marcus was receiving. You okay? Derek shook his head slowly. No, I'm not okay, but I think I understand now what Mr. Thompson meant about growth. This has been the worst day of my career, but maybe it needed to happen. What do you mean? Derek looked at her seriously. I mean, maybe I needed to fail this badly to understand what I was doing wrong. Maybe this is my chance to become the kind of security guard, the kind of person who actually honors veterans instead of just thinking I do. As Marcus, Tyler and Chen walked toward the exit together, their reunion continuing after 8 decades apart. Derek realized he was witnessing something far more significant than a corrected mistake. He was watching the power of forgiveness in action and learning that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the people we least expect to teach them. 3 weeks later, Derek Walsh stood in the museum's conference room, reviewing the presentation materials he had helped prepare for Marcus Thompson's upcoming Veterans Day speech. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same man he had publicly humiliated was now trusting him to help share one of the most important stories in American military history. The past weeks had been transformative for Derek in ways he hadn't expected. After the incident, he had requested additional training on military history and veteran services. He'd spent hours researching the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, learning about the complexities of World War II military integration that his oversimplified understanding had completely missed. Colonel Mitchell entered the conference room carrying a small wooden box. "Derek, Marcus asked me to show you this before the ceremony tonight." Derek looked up from the presentation notes. "What is it?" Mitchell opened the box to reveal Marcus's Purple Heart, now properly cleaned and restored to its original condition. Beside it lay several other medals Derek didn't recognize, along with what appeared to be official military commendations. "These are all Marcus's," Mitchell explained. His wife had actually donated more than just the Purple Heart. "Our research team has been working with the families of other 442nd veterans to identify and return personal items that were donated over the years. It turns out Marcus wasn't the only veteran whose family thought they were helping by giving away painful reminders." Derek studied the medals with newfound respect. "How many veterans have we potentially misunderstood over the years because we didn't know their full stories?" "More than we'll ever know," Mitchell replied soberly. "That's why tonight's event is so important. Marcus isn't just telling his own story. He's giving voice to countless other veterans whose service has been overlooked or misunderstood." The main auditorium was filling with guests for the evening ceremony. Derek had been assigned to work security for the event, but his role had evolved beyond simple crowd control. He had become something of an informal greeter, helping identify other veterans in attendance and ensuring they felt welcomed and honored. Among the early arrivals were several members of Marcus's extended family, including Tyler, who was wearing a small replica of his grandfather's combat medic insignia. The boy had become something of a celebrity at his school after word spread about his grandfather's heroic service. Derek approached Tyler and his parents near the entrance. "Hey there, Tyler. Ready to hear your grandfather's speech?" Tyler nodded enthusiastically. "Derek, did you know my grandpa saved 23 people during the war? Not just the 12 from Mr. Bobby's story, but 11 more in other battles." Derek's eyes widened. This was new information to him. 23? That's incredible. Tyler's father, Michael Thompson, extended his hand to Derek. "You must be the security guard my father-in-law told us about. He speaks very highly of you." Derek felt a familiar pang of guilt. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to know how sorry I am for what happened that day. Your father-in-law is an extraordinary man, and I treated him terribly." Michael smiled warmly. "Derek, my father-in-law doesn't hold grudges. He sees this whole experience as an opportunity to educate people about veteran recognition. He's actually grateful it happened." "Grateful?" Derek couldn't hide his surprise. "He told me that if your confrontation hadn't occurred, he never would have been reunited with his Purple Heart, never would have reconnected with Bobby Chen, and never would have been given the platform to share these stories with a new generation." As they spoke, Staff Sergeant Chen arrived with his own family members, including several grandchildren. The reunion between Chen and Marcus 3 weeks ago had sparked a broader reconnection among surviving members of their unit. Through social media and veteran organizations, they had located 3 other surviving members of their medical team, all of whom were attending tonight's ceremony. Derek watched as the elderly veterans embraced, their joy at being reunited evident to everyone in the room. These men, now in their late 90s, had shared experiences that bonded them in ways most people could never understand. Janet Rodriguez approached Derek, carrying a clipboard with the evening's security assignments. "How are you feeling about tonight?" Derek considered the question seriously, nervous, honestly. 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew everything about identifying fake veterans. Now I realize I knew almost nothing about veteran experiences at all. "That's growth," Janet observed. "And it's why Colonel Mitchell asked you to introduce Marcus tonight instead of doing it himself." Derek's stomach tightened. "I'm still not sure I'm the right person for that honor. Marcus specifically requested you," Janet reminded him. "He said there was something powerful about the person who questioned his service being the one to publicly affirm it." The auditorium was now nearly full, with over 300 attendees, including veterans from multiple conflicts, their families, local dignitaries, and museum donors. Derek noticed several people recording with professional cameras. Apparently, word of Marcus's story had spread beyond the local community. At 7 o'clock sharp, Colonel Mitchell stepped to the podium to begin the evening's program. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this special Veterans Day ceremony. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from a true American hero, but before we meet him, I'd like to invite Derek Walsh to the stage. Derek's heart pounded as he made his way to the podium. Looking out at the crowd, he could see Marcus sitting in the front row with Tyler on his lap, both of them smiling encouragingly. 3 weeks ago, Derek began, his voice steady despite his nerves, I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I publicly questioned the military service of a decorated war hero based on nothing more than my own ignorance and prejudice. A murmur went through the audience. Many had heard about the incident through social media or word of mouth, but this was Derek's first public acknowledgement of what had happened. I accused Marcus Thompson of lying about his service because I thought I knew what a real veteran looked like, what a real war story sounded like. I was so confident in my assumptions that I humiliated him in front of his grandson and a crowd of strangers. Derek paused, looking directly at Marcus. What I learned that day was that real heroes don't look like what we expect them to look like. They don't tell their stories the way Hollywood movies tell them. Real heroes are quiet, humble people who carry extraordinary experiences with grace and dignity. The auditorium was completely silent now. Everyone focused on Derek's words. Marcus Thompson saved 23 lives during World War II. He served with distinction in one of the most decorated units in American military history. He earned his Purple Heart by running into enemy fire to rescue wounded soldiers. And he did it while dealing with the additional challenges of being a black medic in a largely segregated military. Derek's voice grew stronger as he continued. But here's what makes Marcus Thompson truly extraordinary. When I publicly humiliated him, when I called him a liar and accused him of stolen valor, he responded with forgiveness and grace. He turned my mistake into a teaching moment, not just for me, but for everyone who witnessed what happened. Applause began to build throughout the auditorium as people recognized the courage it took for Derek to make this public confession. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and privilege to introduce a man who exemplifies the very best of American military service, and who has taught me more about honor and forgiveness in 3 weeks than I learned in years of thinking I understood what it meant to respect our veterans. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. Marcus stood slowly, embracing Derek before taking the podium. Tyler remained in his front row seat, beaming with pride as his grandfather prepared to share their family's history with the world. As Marcus began to speak, Derek realized that this moment, standing on stage next to a man he had wronged, having been forgiven and trusted with helping, to tell one of the most important stories of courage and sacrifice, represented everything he had been, missing in his understanding of what it truly meant to honor veterans. The real lesson wasn't about identifying fake heroes. It was about recognizing that true heroism often comes in forms we don't expect, from people who don't seek recognition, and that sometimes our greatest mistakes can become our most important opportunities to learn and grow. Marcus's voice filled the auditorium as he began his story, and Derek knew that this night would change not just his own understanding of military service, but the perspectives of everyone in attendance. Sometimes, he realized, the most powerful way to honor our veterans is simply to listen to their stories with open hearts and minds, ready to learn from their experiences, rather than judge them by our expectations. Marcus Thompson's voice resonated through the packed auditorium as he concluded his speech, with words that would be quoted in newspapers and shared across social media for weeks to come. Service isn't about the medals on your chest or the stories you tell. It's about the quiet moments when you choose to help others, even when no one is watching, even when it costs you something. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes, with many audience members openly weeping. Derek stood beside the podium, watching as Marcus was surrounded by well-wishers, including several young veterans from recent conflicts who wanted to shake hands with the World War II hero. Among those approaching Marcus was a young woman in a Navy uniform, Petty Officer Sarah Martinez. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "your story reminds me why I enlisted. Sometimes I forget that serving isn't just about the big moments. It's about showing up every day with integrity." Marcus clasped her hand warmly. "Young lady, every generation of veterans carries the torch forward. You're part of that legacy now." Nearby, Colonel Mitchell was fielding calls from reporters and historians who had gotten word about the evening's events. The story of Marcus's reunion with his Purple Heart and his reconciliation with Derek had captured national attention, with several major news outlets requesting interviews. Derek overheard one of Mitchell's phone conversations. "Yes, we're considering developing a traveling exhibit about integrated medical units during World War II. Mr. Thompson has agreed to serve as a historical consultant." As the crowd began to thin, Derek noticed Tyler sitting quietly in the front row, carefully holding a small notebook where he had been writing throughout his grandfather's speech. Derek approached the boy, curious about what had captured his attention so completely. "What are you working on there, Tyler?" Tyler looked up with serious eyes. "I'm writing down everything Grandpa said tonight. My teacher says I can do my school report on family history, and I want to make sure I get all the details right." Derek knelt down beside Tyler's chair. "That's a great idea. Your grandfather's story is definitely worth preserving, Derek," Tyler said, using the security guard's first name with the familiarity of someone who had come to trust him. "Why do you think some people didn't believe my grandpa at first?" The question hit Derek like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth about his own behavior. "Tyler, I think sometimes people make assumptions based on what they think they know, instead of listening carefully to what someone is actually telling them." Tyler nodded sagely. Far more mature than his 8 years should have allowed. "Grandpa says everyone deserves to have their story heard before people decide if it's true or not." "Your grandfather is a very wise man," Derek replied, struck by the profound simplicity of Tyler's observation. Across the room, Marcus was engaged in conversation with Dr. Patricia Kim, a historian from the Smithsonian who had driven down specifically to meet him after hearing about the evening's program. "Mr. Thompson, your experience represents a largely untold chapter of American military history," Dr. Kim was saying. "The integration of medical personnel across racial lines during specific combat operations challenges many assumptions about World War II military segregation." Marcus listened thoughtfully. "Doctor, I hope that sharing my story helps people understand that history is rarely as simple as we make it seem in textbooks. Real life is messier, more complicated, but also more hopeful than the official versions often suggest." Dr. Kim nodded enthusiastically. "That's exactly why we need to document these experiences while we still can. Would you be willing to participate in an oral history project? Your testimony could help educate future generations about the realities of wartime service." Meanwhile, Staff Sergeant Chen was surrounded by his own group of admirers, including several Japanese-American families, whose grandfathers had served in the 442nd. The evening had become an unexpected reunion, not just for individual veterans, but for entire communities whose stories had been overshadowed by more widely known military narratives. Derek observed these conversations with a growing understanding of how profoundly his initial confrontation with Marcus had rippled outward. What began as his misguided attempt to protect military honor had ultimately created a platform for authentic veteran voices to be heard and celebrated. Janet approached Derek as he stood observing the ongoing conversations. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Derek considered her question carefully. "I'm thinking about how wrong I was about everything. I thought my job was to catch people lying about military service. But I never considered that my real job should have been creating an environment where real veterans feel comfortable sharing their experiences. That's a profound shift in perspective, Janet observed. What are you going to do with that realization? Before Derek could answer, Colonel Mitchell joined their conversation. Derek, I've been talking with museum administration about your performance over the past few weeks. Your work on tonight's event and your collaboration with Marcus on the educational materials has been exceptional. Derek felt a flutter of anxiety. Sir, I hope my initial mistake hasn't reflected poorly on the museum's reputation. Mitchell smiled. Actually, quite the opposite. The way you've handled the aftermath of that incident has demonstrated exactly the kind of character we want in our security staff. I'd like to offer you a position in our Visitor Services Department, working specifically with veteran outreach and education programs. Derek's eyes widened in surprise. Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified for that kind of responsibility. Derek, Marcus's voice came from behind them as he approached the group. Qualification isn't just about what you know when you start. It's about your willingness to learn and grow. You've demonstrated both of those qualities admirably. Tyler had followed his grandfather over and now tugged on Derek's sleeve. Does this mean you'll be here when we come back to visit Grandpa's medal? Derek looked down at the boy, then at Marcus, feeling the weight of the trust being placed in him. Tyler, I'll be here whenever you want to visit, and I'll make sure every veteran who walks through these doors feels welcomed and respected. As the evening wound down, Derek found himself helping Marcus pack up the display materials they had prepared together. Among the items was the original photograph Chen had shown during their confrontation 3 weeks earlier. The image that had proved Marcus's service beyond any doubt. Marcus, Derek said quietly, I want you to know that what happened between us has changed my entire understanding of what it means to serve others. Not just military service, but service in general. Marcus paused in his packing, looking at Derek with the same patient expression he had maintained even during the worst moments of their initial encounter. Derek, the most important battles aren't always fought on foreign soil. Sometimes they're fought right here at home, in our own hearts and minds. When we have to confront our own limitations and prejudices. I lost that battle pretty badly 3 weeks ago, Derek admitted. No, Marcus corrected gently. You won it. You just won it in a way you weren't expecting. Real victory isn't about being right from the beginning. It's about having the courage to admit when you're wrong and the wisdom to learn from the experience. As Marcus and Tyler prepared to leave, Tyler ran back to Derek one final time. Derek, next time someone tells you they're a veteran, will you remember Grandpa's story? Derek knelt down to Tyler's level, looking the boy directly in the eyes. Tyler, I promise you that I will never again assume I know someone's story before I've taken the time to listen to it properly. Your grandfather taught me that real heroes don't always look like what we expect them to look like. Tyler smiled and gave Derek an unexpected hug before rejoining his grandfather. As they walked toward the exit, Derek heard Tyler say, Grandpa, I think Derek learned something really important tonight. Marcus's response carried clearly across the nearly empty auditorium. Yes, Tyler, he did. And sometimes the most important lessons come from the mistakes we make along the way. Derek stood alone in the auditorium, surrounded by the echoes of an evening that had transformed not just his own understanding, but the lives of everyone who had witnessed Marcus Thompson's quiet dignity and profound grace. The security guard who had started the day 3 weeks ago thinking he knew how to identify fake veterans had become someone entirely different, someone who understood that the greatest honor we can give our veterans is simply to listen to their stories with open hearts and minds. In the weeks that followed, Derek's transformation would inspire changes in veteran recognition protocols at museums across the country. Marcus's story would be featured in documentaries and history textbooks. Tyler would win first place in his school's history fair with his report on his grandfather's service. But perhaps most importantly, the confrontation that began with prejudice and ended with understanding became a powerful reminder that our mistakes don't have to define us. They can transform us, if we have the courage to learn from them and the wisdom to let them teach us how to be better. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.